Yeah.
And
We
it's
are live.
wonderful. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Barbara Peters behind this Hollywood look, and the Hollywood look is because I have an ulcer in my left eye and I can't see anything. So I am going to make a brief introduction and turn this over to our authors, Alison Gaylin and Talia Lavin, and Patrick will be lurking in the background as he normally does, and we'll be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Yeah.
Also, Allison has very kindly signed our copies of We Are Watching, but they haven't quite gotten here yet. But Patrick, you're going to put a buy link in, right? So
Yeah, I'll put a buy link, and we also have some signed copies left of her book from last September, I think it was,
it was.
Robert
Yep.
B. Parker's Buzzkill. We have some signed copies left. And I'll put a
Great.
link there too. And I'll also put a link for Talia's two books, if you'd like to purchase
Yay.
one. Yeah.
Right. So the book that is part of the discussion today with Allison is called Wild Faith by Talia. She has an earlier book. In fact, I could read a very brief bio here just because we don't know Talia. She's the author of the critically acclaimed book Culture Warlords, a journalist who has had bylines, there it is, in many major newspapers, writes a newsletter, The Sword and the Sandwich, which is featured in Best American Food and Travel Writing. And her latest book, the one we're discussing tonight, Wild Faith, How the Christian Right is Taking Over America, which, as the talk progresses, Allison will make clear why Talia was indeed a big inspiration source, whatever it might have been, and writing We Are Watching. Allison herself has been nominated for 4 Edgars, won one. Is the Shamus Award still going, or is that it's sort of defunct, isn't it, at this
I
point?
grabbed one before it got defunct, I think.
But
So
the
yeah.
Shamus Award was from the Private Eyes of America for private eye novels, and Allison won for Best First Novel and won the Edgar. But 4 Edgar nominations, that's pretty classy. I understand the Edgar announcement came out today, but I haven't had time to look at it. So am I missing one? Are you up again?
No, I'm not up again. I didn't actually have a book come out last year besides the Parker book, and I don't even know whether, doing you know, a,
A
a,
legacy book?
a legacy book. That I was looking for the word. Thank you.
There it is.
Is eligible even for the Edgars. So no, but I'm sure they're wonderful books.
That's a really interesting question. Well, I'm going to look them up. I do know that John Sanford and Laura Lippman are the new Grand Masters, and today Mick Herron has been announced as the Diamond Dagger winner from the Crime Writers Association of Great Britain. So we know who's getting those awards, which are not related to a book, but rather to a career. Anyway,
Yeah.
thank you very much for joining us, and I'm going to turn this over to Allison and Talia and Patrick and take my sunglasses and my little self off the screen. Thank you very much for coming tonight.
Great, thank you. I'm very excited about those, Grandmaster, especially Laura Lippman. She's an amazing author.
Yeah.
I'm thrilled about that.
Yeah,
Uh,
she and I are in a group chat for lady writers together, and been friends for years.
Just saw
I'm
the advanced reader copy of her new book, which looks very cool.
I'm
yeah.
I'm the grandmaster of like farting after I eat too much cheese.
Oh, I guess I must
Yeah,
be
I
the
think
second Grandmaster of that.
Talia is being very,
The
very
vice,
humble.
the vice Grandmaster.
Yeah,
Let me
yeah.
let me go ahead and I'll get off the screen, but yeah, Talia, you're being very humble, and I just wanted to commend you for all the important stuff that you're doing. And if there's a moment, maybe we can ask you a few questions about your work and the dark web world of white supremacy and all sorts of things, like all light topics we can get into towards the end of the hour. But yeah, so I'll just be off screen, but I'll be watching. And so if you have questions, people on Facebook and YouTube, if you have questions for Allison or Talia, go ahead and type them in as usual. And towards the end of the hour, I'll come back on screen and I'll be happy to ask any of the questions that you have. So I will leave it to you guys. Have
Great.
fun.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hi.
Gosh, your book was so intense. I like my heart was pounding as I'm reading, and I had also read your book, The Collective,
Mhm.
and loved it. And I've noticed that there's a theme of female revenge and real ass kicking. I mean, I haven't read your entire oeuvre, but based on the two books I've read. Um, and the other thing I noticed in this book is, do you know like the term fridging? Like,
Wait, I don't know. What is that? What does that mean?
so it's it was like a feminist commentator on like comic books noticed that repeatedly in like tons and tons of comic books within the first like 20 minutes of, couple panels or 20 minutes of a movie, a male protagonist has his female partner die. And then it
Mhm.
serves as his motivation for the rest
Yeah.
of the film. John Wick is a classic archetype for this. Like,
Yes,
pretty
exactly.
lady shows up, says, I love you, and immediately gets murdered. So fridging was from one particular comic where, I don't know, Green Lantern's girlfriend winds up in a refrigerator. Um,
Oh, so it's like it's the whole sort of like beautiful woman dies, man gets, man is unhappy sort of trope. That's
yeah, but like this fuels my quest for vengeance. Now I'll become the
yeah.
hero. And your book has sort of a reverse fridging, where
Hmm.
Justin's death is sort of the impetus that sets this all rolling. And so it felt like you have, ladies with guns and knives. You've got a reverse fridging. Like this feels like a powerful feminist book.
That's so interesting. That's a really interesting and great observation. I love that. Yeah, I think, obviously like it's been a great time for sort of female crime writers in general to sort of like kind of take the reins and write from that female, perspective, that point of view. And I never thought of it as a reverse of that trope, which I'm so familiar with from like a million different things. But it definitely is. I mean, it's interesting. A lot of the characters I write have husbands. I mean, I have a husband that is present, but most of the characters I write that have husbands that are not present, so they can sort of just work on their own and not. And then with this, she had a very happy marriage. Everything seemed great in her mind. And then, within, the early scenes of it, the husband is killed. And then she finds out this entire conspiracy that is sort of the reason for, or could be the reason for this car accident that they get into in the first scene.
It's Chekhov's lug nut.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you know, it's funny. I like to write about, I mean, we all write from, a point of view that's reasonably similar to our own. Um, Wild Faith just floored me. I thought it was amazing. I thought it was actually sort of, I mean, it was as much like a thriller as a nonfiction book could possibly be, but it's just sort of like a horrible thriller that makes me like curl up in the fetal position, which I sort of think my book is like too. And I actually think we were sort of inspired by similar things. I mean, within the first pages of Wild Faith, you mentioned one of my um, inspirations for writing this book, which is the McMartin case, the McMartin preschool case, and the whole satanic panic thing. I'm actually wondering, you actually summed up the McMartin case so well. I've tried to talk about it in various interviews because it actually was a sort of inspiration for me in writing this book. But if you could just sum it up, it's a memory of mine because I grew up in Southern California and the McMartin trial. I think when it started, I was in high school, and by the time it ended, I had graduated from college and I was out in the world.
Yeah,
But
it
yeah,
was 7 years of absolute torture that these daycare workers at the McMartin preschool were put through. It was 7 years long. It was at the time the most expensive trial in US history. And it was sort of a confluence. I mean, I don't have to go into the whole causes of the satanic panic, although I imagine it's a passion of both of ours.
Mhm.
So fertile, so fruitful, and so terrifying. But basically, at the time, there was sort of a new and orthodoxy in psychology about recovering repressed memories. There was also a lot of Christian right panic about Satan, which is sort of more or less been the case for like all of American history. There was sort of a feminist movement to respect victims' rights and to understand how widespread child abuse really was, and the perpetual sort of law enforcement desire to be seen as effective and get reelected. And so it all turned into this perfect storm, of which McMartin is one of the most famous cases, basically alleging that there was this epidemic of Satan worship throughout the country, but particularly focused in the nation's daycares, where you had this literally unholy mix of child sexual abuse and ritual abuse.
Yeah. Satanic ritual abuse, the big,
Yeah, that was the literally like a term of art. It was in academic papers and journals. Um, and so it sort of came out of the world of psychology and then entered criminal justice with a vengeance. And so poor folks like the McMartin case, like the McMartin Seven. So I mean, it's just imagine undergoing. They were eventually acquitted, but
Mhm.
you're undergoing
Doesn't
7
matter.
years
Yeah.
of people thinking you are the worst kind of child rapist, Satan
Yeah.
worshiper, and there are still McMartin truthers out there. Um,
Absolutely. And when it started, it was common, quote unquote, common knowledge among people in Southern California that these people were conducting these satanic rituals in tunnels that never actually existed under their school, and
yeah, the
that,
orgy tunnels, people went digging for
yeah,
them.
yeah, exactly. So,
And you have a scene very similar to that in your book where
yeah,
someone enters the bookstore and is sort of like, I know what happens. The I think her name is Cassandra, the sort of mentally unstable Facebook lady.
yeah,
Um,
Claire Cassadine, exactly.
sorry.
Close. Yeah, exactly. Right, right. I had to
Sorry.
think of it myself.
Claire, she's just like that was reminiscent of both like the McMartin stuff and then its modern um uh, like the descendant, like the guy that went into the Comet ping pong pizza shop and was like, "Show me
Yes.
your basement," and they didn't have a basement.
Exactly. Those were my two main inspirations for this book because what kind of fascinates me the most about the danger that conspiracy theories cause and just sort of the horror of large groups of people believing the same wrong thing and going after people is not quite so much the Illuminati conspiracy theories or even QAnon where the targets are these celebrities that sort of have security. They have, they're removed. When it focuses on people like the McMartin family or like the owner of Comet Pizza in Washington, D.C., which are just normal people trying to go about their lives, trying to make their livings. And then all of a sudden, this kind of furor takes over a group of people that they don't even know. And they are looking for answers to something that doesn't exist. It's really fascinating. And I found that so fascinating about your book, sort of pointing that up, you know, the whole power of belief, but more than the power of belief, like the destructive power of belief, like beyond where you can even listen to reason or rationality and see the truth, you know?
Everything becomes pattern seeking, and anything that's,
Mhm.
accepted as a consensus reality is by default not to be trusted because people believe it.
Exactly.
Because it is out in the open and not secret, therefore it must be a lie. And,
Yeah.
if you have to dig for it and create these pattern seeking symbol stuff, symbolic codes, and there are people, in addition to the many preschool workers embroiled in the satanic panic, including people like Fran and Dan Keller of Texas, who did
Yeah.
decades of hard time. And it is under like accusations of extremely brutal child abuse, this incredible stain on their name for decades on the thinnest of pretexts. But there are also people in our modern era, ordinary people, first of all, there's, every day there's some teacher or academic or journalist that gets caught up in a right-wing whirlwind, sort of looking for their 15 minutes of hate.
Yeah, that's
And
exactly right. Yeah, that's a great
I,
phrase.
I've sort of counseled a lot of people like through being that person, and it is rough. It's like feels like if the roof is torn up off your life. And then also normal people getting embroiled in these broader conspiracy theories like election workers, people accused of being mass shooters because they sort of look like a guy on a video, and a bunch of Reddit sleuths, think that this is the guy, and so you have to deal, yeah, this sort of terror of like losing your the like protection of anonymity, ordinariness, and even innocence.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, I feel like as a fiction writer, I could come at it again and again and again and again. I could come at it from so many different angles. You just mentioned a lot of them, but it's just the idea of a large group, like the terror of a large group believing the wrong thing about you. It stems back to, getting bullied or, anything. It's just, it's this, it's an appeal that exists to find a whole bunch of like minds that believe the same wrong thing as you do, and so many minds make it right and make it correct, and not only make it correct but make you a hero for persecuting this other person. It's been going on since the dawn of time, since blood libel, since everything. So kind of it's kind of
yeah.
fascinating. Yeah.
And the way that Judaism and Jewish identity and anti-Semitism is part of this book is
Yeah.
um also fascinating. I mean, just like to be a Jew is to be born with this heritage of like millions of people around the world sort of automatically believing that you have a part in some pernicious globe spanning conspiracy. Like that's as much part of our heritage as everything else.
Yeah, absolutely.
And um yeah, I mean, and I felt like you were coming at that
Yeah,
in
it's interesting.
too.
Like, yeah, I mean, I'm Jewish, and it's like, but just sort of growing up when I did, there's a tendency to say, I mean, the father in my book, the Nathan, the character in my book, um, is a former sort of progressive rock bass player that achieved some minor success, but was like sort of accused of Satanism. But he's also a Jewish guy, and he was the only Jewish guy in his band. And weirdly enough, he got all of the sort of Satanist rumors spread about him, unlike other people in the band. And he, has been sort of claiming anti-Semit. This is, there's an anti-Semitic cabal out there. They're all coming after me. And his daughter, who is Meg, and the main character in my book, is, I mean, there's a real tendency to look back at your parents and just say, you're being paranoid. That's not going on. You're not being persecuted. It's, we're fine. We've had perfectly nice lives. We're not like, people that have like legitimately been persecuted. You're being, overreactive. But there absolutely is this ingrained feeling that we're sort of part of this large privileged conspiracy, which obviously isn't true. I'd love to be part of something, but it's
Yeah, no, like
uh, where
where
is it? Where's my share of this,
yeah, so, I mean, God, like, and I also say something that I thought you captured quite well. As someone who's just like endured a lot of anti-Semitic abuse, as someone who's public facing, who has been writing about, the extreme right for a long time, and who's sort of tangled with them in many ways, and just like the feeling of strangers commenting on your body and your looks and your uh you know uh race and your face at the same time it does make your skin crawl. It is a kind of trauma, and I think you capture that feeling very effectively. Although, of course, in some ways I chose to court this controversy. In many other ways I didn't. It started before my book came out. Um, but I thought you captured that particular, this book to me like felt half thriller mystery and half like a horror book.
Yeah.
Like it does straddle those genres.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I was writing it, I was really thinking a lot of, I mean, I'm a huge fan of Ira Levin. I love Stepford Wives, Rosemary's Baby. I love these books that are social horror. I love, um, I don't know. And I've been watching a lot of horror movies and I don't know, maybe it's just the times we live in. I want to escape into something even worse. I'm not sure.
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, when I'm
Right?
at my most depressed, I like binge listen to like true crime podcasts. Uh,
Yes, me
like
too.
I'm just like,
Same.
well, at least I'm not a hitchhiker being murdered in the 1970s, which is terrible, I
Exactly.
guess. But like, I don't know. Uh, Ira Levin comes up in my book briefly in the
Yes.
chapter on the Satanic Panic because he wrote Rosemary's Baby and then the movie came out. And
Mhm.
um he basically said, I kind of regret it because putting that fear of the devil like back into the popular consciousness, like it spawned other books and movies like The Omen and The
Mhm.
Exorcist and like, you know, pop culture. I mean, like in your book, a fantasy novel, this pop culture artifact is a huge part of the conspiracy. And I thought that was apt because, pop culture views of the devil and Satan and his sort of supremacy are really have like shaped American spiritual beliefs and fixations. And so, Ira Levin in like 2002 was like, yeah, I wish I hadn't riled up all those fundamentalists, which I don't think that's fair. I mean, Rosemary's Baby is great, but like,
Yeah, oh, there's so many more. I mean, like you mentioned Michelle Remembers in your book, which is like that was, kind of a seminal work of this woman claiming that when she was young, she was a victim of satanic ritual abuse and that happened and you know, it it turned out to be completely instilled in her mind by her I mean, it was just such a common theme. And the interesting thing about Rosemary's Baby to me is it's like the satanic stuff is the least scary part of it. The whole part of it that makes it such a great horror book is the idea of nobody believing you, the idea of being completely gaslit by a huge group, a large group of people that includes the person you love most, your husband. I mean, that's what's so great about that. Just like The Exorcist, I mean, what scared me the most about The Exorcist wasn't the satanic thing, but it was the idea of your kid just freaking out. I mean, like as a mother, that's just like your kid. It's sort of like your kid going through puberty. It's just like they're doing something out of control, that you cannot, that they're acting in a way that you never have sort of seen before. And how do I deal with that? I mean, that's what it is at its core. I mean, if it was just about like Satan, I don't think it would be quite as scary as a work of art. But I feel like with all of those things, and I tried to do that with my book too, is that in order to make these things genuinely frightening, you can come out with the most outlandish idea in the world. A young woman and her husband move into a New York apartment, and he arranges for her to get impregnated by the devil. I mean, that sounds ridiculous when you say that. But if you make the characters really real, like people that you could know, and you make them multidimensional and flawed and everything else, then you can kind of get away with most anything. So I like to come up with these plots that are sort of outlandish in a way, but to get the grip on it, to make people think, oh, this could really happen, you've got to sort of come up with these fictional characters that are as real as you can make them. So I spent as much time with the book trying to deal with family dynamics as I did with trying to come up with like this conspiracy theory, which is
Oh, totally. I mean, which is also
um,
fantastic.
oh
I don't want to like spoil too much, but like there's the scene with Lee Man and the
yeah.
gold. That was my favorite one.
Oh,
That was great. I mean, I love like all those scenes. That scene was nuts. I mean, it's really this action roller coaster, like for the, back half of the book, and it's all sort of in the 2 days leading up to this earth-shattering date, and really like very gripping in that way. And it's hard to write about the internet in ways that are like jump off the page, and I think you succeeded. But I know that in my first book, a lot of what I was doing was like describing chat rooms and like videos and links, and it's hard like to do that and
but you
make
have
it
such a great way
fit.
of doing that. You capture like, I mean, in especially in nonfiction, you're dealing with actual real events, but the way you write it is in such a way that it's very compelling in the same way that a thriller would be. So,
Well, I appreciate it. I'm working on my first novel now, and it's like uh fiction has always seemed like a bit of magic to me, like that you can just make stuff up. I was a fact checker for 3 years, and I'm like, oh, I like none of this is true. And it's like I've had to like retrain my brain to be like, no, you're making it up. And like
yeah.
there's gonna be inconsistencies, and like then you can smooth them out later, but you're just like all of this is coming from your mind and you're vibing, and it's been very difficult to adjust that. But um at any rate, to just to go back to what you were
Oh,
saying
good.
about characters and their dynamics, this is also like a book about parents and children and like failure to communicate and then wanting to protect each other, and so hiding things that ultimately like there's so many missed connection sort of moments, so many secrets ill-advisedly kept. But part of what makes this a fantasy and like an exciting sort of thrilling fantasy is like and really emotionally satisfying. It's like at the end, like the father that's felt so distant, it turns out he heard you. Like the
Hmm.
mother who you've been trying to figure out how to distance yourself from or feeling distant from will like shoot a fucking gun to save you. Ultimately this is a fantasy of like yes, it acknowledges these painful misses, but it's also there's this ultimate like sweeping intense reconciliation, and that felt so emotionally satisfying
Oh, I'm
to
so
me.
glad. Yeah, it's interesting. It's like, I mean, it's always like where the book is going to sort of go ultimately depends so much on the characters. And I mean, the collective ended on a really different note, but I just felt like it was the only way it could go. And, with this, I just felt like it's so much more about bonding with your family. It's about understanding your family, and it's so hard, to understand your parents or understand your child, to the degree where you're willing to sort of, you know, respect them.
Well,
And
I mean, and there's multiple moments where you have characters. Nathan says this, and Meg says this is like, why didn't I ask? Why did I never ask? And
Yeah.
why didn't I like ask for that revelation? Why did I dismiss? You know, and there are reasons for
Hmm.
that, right? These are
Yeah.
wounded people. These are people that have been through so much, and so much grief, and like they're protecting themselves, but also it's like you have to be. And I thought, Lily was such an interestingly handled character because so often with teenage girls, there's so many archetypes they could fall into, but Lily kind of didn't. She felt sort of jagged and spiky and figuring her stuff out, and like we don't blame her for falling for someone who reached out when she was in pain. We don't blame her for, you know, like smoking weed. Like she's she's a teen, but she's not malevolent. She's not some femme fatale. She's just a kid. And then, when she comes into her own, she comes into her own, like this as this like Amazon. I thought it was great the way you handled that. It wasn't like
Oh, thank
these
you.
kids and their vapes and their phones.
I'm,
Um,
yeah. I mean, I really feel like that's a thing. You just, it's sort of like, I mean, my mantra when I write, even though I write these kind of sort of outlandish things, is just keep it real as far as the characters go, just try and make them as far from just a trope of a person as you can. Just try to make them into real people that you might feel like because that's the way a reader is going to relate to the story enough to be scared. And that's my goal, just to scare you. And, just be scared. Just please be scared. And if I feel like if I make characters that where you can think either that's me or oh that's somebody I know or or something like that, then I can tell my story. And the purpose of my story usually is to kind of scare you. So, yeah.
I love that line that Bonnie had where she's like, you poor kids, like the world is in such a hurry to end. And I'm
Yeah,
like, yeah, oh man. Not that
it
I'm
is.
like a teen, but like still, it's just uh
I feel so sorry for people younger than me. I really do.
like
But
I'm gonna die out of it. It'll be fine. Like
yeah.
maybe. But or maybe not. Given the particular moment we're in.
Yeah,
Um,
who knows?
I mean, and I think the other thing that I liked about this book, this is just me saying things I like about your book to your face.
I love that. Makes me happy. So,
Well, I did like, in contrast to Rosemary's Baby and The Omen and The Exorcist and all this stuff, like Satan isn't the evil here, and neither are Satan worshippers, and neither are Satan believers. It's people who believe they're vanquishing Satan, who are the enemy, who are the conspirators, in this sort of like delightfully like creepy like hot fuzz slash Wicker Man kind of like everyone in the town is whatever like the um in on it kind of way.
yeah.
Straw dogs
Yeah.
like you were tying together some like tried and true, but like excellent folk horror tropes in that way. But like, I did love that trope inversion of like it is the people who so firmly believe that they're defeating the devil and fighting the devil and see the devil manifest everywhere that that are the real danger. And that's something that certainly is basically the thesis of my own book.
Yes.
Uh,
Exactly. That's what I thought when I read it. I mean, it's sort of, but yours is much scarier because it's true and it's happening.
I mean,
But
someday I would like to write a book that like people aren't like, um, I started your book and then I had to stop because I kept getting panic attacks. Oh, like I threw up after I read your book. I'm like,
it's so scary. It is, but
uh,
I honestly couldn't put it down. And it's like, with a nonfiction book, I usually sort of sit down and I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to learn a little bit about. No, this was just so compelling and so terrifying in a way where it's, it's stuff that we've seen and that we know, but it's sort of just shining a spotlight on it and showing how dangerous it truly is.
Well, it's
But
just like it's
yeah,
also, now that we're past the inauguration and it's all happening and it's the sort of
yeah.
Sturm und Drang like blitzkrieg of stuff. Um of horror. But it's like so many of the figures that I wrote about in my book are like hanging out at the White House,
Yeah, exactly.
like Mike Johnson and
Yeah.
Sean Foicht, the sort of his hair looks a little bit like ramen noodles, and he's evil, and he's there at the inauguration. Bill, Franklin Graham gave an invocation and he said, God raises up kings and throws down kings, and God's hand, despite like attempts to stop God's will, like God has returned Donald Trump to office. So it's this very intense, like the Christian nationalism, it's in the room with us right now.
Yeah.
It's right here. And so, it's always gauche. It's like it's gauche and rough to be like, hey, terrible things are happening, and I spent the last 3 years writing a book about it. It feels bad to be like, well, I'm gonna capitalize on. I'm like awful, it's like self-promotion is so can be like painful sometimes, but
But
especially if
it's
you're
not, I
like,
mean, I felt the same way, a little bit about my book. I was like, well, I hope this can just be an escape for people who, we're past it now. We're past that type of belief system, but we're not. And I just think, I mean, yes, your book is not the type of escape where you could just sit on a beach and read it and be like, whoo, thank God we avoided that. But
I know
it's
I'd hoped so
it's
much it would like
important
be
though.
less relevant. Like I
Yeah,
hedged the
exactly.
end.
You're too relevant, Talia.
I hedged the ending. I'm like, well, I don't know what's gonna happen in the election in a month, but like,
Yeah.
either way, the Christian right will be relevant, and then whatever. It's
Like so relevant. It's
like I
yeah,
wrote about neo-Nazis, and then 2 months later, like January 6th happened. Like it's like
yeah.
I don't know, maybe I should stop releasing books in election years. Like, am I?
You're a prophet. Write a book about like everybody's happy and none of this is going on. No one's getting persecuted. Everyone's being treated equally. No,
Yeah,
you
yeah, no,
can't
I'll
do
write
that.
like the world's most boring account of utopia and it'll be great.
Exactly. Exactly. But yeah, no,
Um,
I know. I mean the Mike Johnson stuff in particular that you kind of put in your book, I was surprised at because I wasn't familiar with him until he became speaker, and just found out the little bit about him from listening to NPR, and I didn't realize the extent to which this belief system went back, until I with
well,
him until I read your book. Yeah, so
it's like, but my mom was like, well, Mike Johnson, he seems nice, he seems reasonable. I'm like, yeah, he seems nice, he
yeah.
seems reasonable. That's his role, to like
Mhm.
embody this superficial politesse, this niceness, this reasonableness, and then what he's voting for and whipping votes for is to cut your fucking throat. Like, oh,
Mhm.
sorry if not, I'm supposed to cuss.
It's okay.
This man will stab you so Jesus will come back faster and he won't blink an eye, to do it. Like, but he and Mike Pence before him,
Yeah.
if we're talking about evil mics in the public sphere. Both of them have this particular kind of evangelical masculinity, which is like, I'm gonna be this paternal figure. I'm gonna embody a certain kind of starchy respectability. And then if you scratch like the surface even a little, like the beliefs are insane and they are zealous and they are sincerely held. Like people are so unwilling to understand that like beliefs that feel alien to them or antithetical to their value systems are sincerely held.
Mhm.
And yet they absolutely are. And the same with the folks in your book. First of all, the sort of seeming normality,
Mhm.
the banality of folks who have these horrifying belief systems, but also the way that sincerely held belief can be much scarier than something being used cynically or for power.
Mhm. Yeah,
Um,
yeah, there's no arguing belief with facts. There just isn't, belief is something that goes deeper than facts, which is terrifying.
yeah,
So,
and I
yeah.
think like, I was raised in a very religious home, but like the type of religion I was raised in never particularly emphasized, it was all like works over faith or whatever, like do the mitzvah, keep kosher, keep
Mhm.
Shabbat. But like when I was interviewing ex-evangelicals for the book, which I did a lot of, like the thing that was familiar was that faith shapes every aspect of your life, what you eat, who you talk to, where you go. But like the faith elements, the belief, this like rock hard belief, that was something I had to grapple with and understand. And I just think so many folks, they view people who choose to adopt or who fall into or are find validation in a conspiracy mindset. They're crazy. And then people who, you know, like have this rock hard Christian nationalist belief are also either crazy or they're not real Christians. And I'm like, well, you don't, who died and made you pope? Like, like
Mhm.
if they're doing it under the literal Christian flag, like, I don't think you get to determine that. Um, Here, religion is like an ancillary element, except
Mhm.
Satan. Satan
Yeah.
is the big character. So did you feel these characters were motivated by Christian belief, or was it sort of a little bit more diffused than that?
I think it was a little more diffused. I mean, what I feel like, with this satanic panic and everything was so little about actual, you know, teachings of Jesus or Christian belief. It's actually just finding someone to demonize. It's like, the witch hunts, it's finding somebody to pick on. And I wanted to try and make it as when I was sort of creating the mythology of these believers. I wanted to make it something that anybody could believe, whether they're on the right or, well, I don't know about, maybe, whatever part of the political spectrum they're on, that wasn't relevant to the fact that there was this book that came out that foretold the future, and her father was in a band and wrote a song that, had satanic, masking in it or whatever they wanted to believe about it. And they created their own mythology. And I wanted it to be just sort of this diverse group of people that all believe the same weird thing, which could be anybody that your friend, your relative, and which is, quite similar to all this other stuff. But I didn't want to kind of root it in, the type of reality that we're living in. I wanted to just kind of make it this thing that could be
Like 10
grasped.
degrees
Yeah,
orthogonal to where we are.
exactly,
Like it's
exactly.
like a mirror, but held at an angle. Like it's very close, but it is.
Yeah,
It's
because
like,
otherwise I would just be writing one of these stories like Pizzagate, or you know what I mean? Like I would be writing like the story of Pizzagate, or I would be writing the story of the McMartin people, I would be writing their story, and I didn't want to do that, but I wanted to do something that could be that, like adjacent to it. So,
yeah, I mean, I also enjoyed the way you play with like text and there's this novel in the novel and that becomes the locus of so much speculation. And I will tell you from a lot of experience lurking in like conspiracy chat rooms, like they absolutely do trade old texts. Like they're
yeah.
poring over the Turner Diaries. They're study
Mhm.
grouping like Confederate eugenics manuals. Like that is happening
Yeah.
every day. And like I was watching it and I'm just like yeah, you guys are nerds. You're dangerous nerds. You're dangerous nerds. That's what you are. You're using the power of being a nerd for evil, and I don't like that. Anyway,
Exactly.
being just write a novel about it. Gee.
I mean, who doesn't like a good conspiracy theory, right? I mean, I have it on,
Neither of us. You're talking to the two wrong people.
well, I'm yeah. But I have it on good authority. Allison, our mutual friend Jen Johans, she says that you have an affinity for conspiracy theory films.
Yes,
Brian De
yes,
Palma and
I love them. I love conspiracy theory movies from the 70s. And Megan Abbott and I wrote a graphic novel called Normandy Gold that was born out of our mutual love for those conspiracy movies, 3 Days of the Condor, The Parallax View,
um,
you know, yeah, exactly. Brian De Palma, most Brian De Palma movies.
was
Um,
that a hard case crime?
Yes, yes, it was a
Yeah,
graphic
yeah.
novel that came out on Hard Case Crime a couple of years ago, and yeah, we had great artwork for it. It was just close to X-rated, but it's
Hey,
conspiracy. I love those type of things where I love them. Rosemary's Baby. I was actually talking to my daughter about this recently. She's film grad, film graduate a graduate of film school. And you know, Rosemary's Baby is the ultimate conspiracy movie when you think about it, or the book, either one. Just the idea of a whole bunch of unforeseen people out to get this one lone person is horrifying to me. So I love those movies.
right.
Yeah.
And you haven't really talked too much about grief, which is a
Mhm.
big component.
Yeah.
What was it like writing about that?
Well, I've done it in a couple of books. I did it in the collective too. And, I've experienced grief. I mean, most people have, once you're over a certain age.
Right.
And it's just, I think it's the most consuming of emotions and it changes you forever. And when my dad died 20 years ago and I was really close to him and a cousin of his said to me, it's like sticking a pin in your finger and you look away from it and you think you're okay and then you look at it and you hurt all over again and it just goes on and on. And so I like writing about grief because I think it's something that most people can relate to. And I also think it's just so overpowering that it can drive a character. So in this book, Meg, the main character, is in full throttle grief, basically. It's only 3 months after her husband has died, her beloved husband, and she's trying to sort of just get on with her life, mainly for the sake of her daughter. The collective was thoroughly grief, and she didn't have a daughter because of that grief, so that was driving her. But yeah, I think it kind of makes everybody a little crazy, and it makes you think maybe I'm not seeing the world in the way that I'm seeing it because I'm grieving. Maybe I'm seeing something wrong. It's sort of a great emotion to work with in books like this because
And everybody expresses it differently.
yeah, exactly. And I just think and if you blow it huge, if you make it big, big grief, it's pretty powerful, and it definitely is something that changes a person and changes a character.
Now, Meg also owns a small bookstore,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
you've obviously been on the road, been to lots of bookstores around the world, I'm sure,
Mhm.
touring and such. Did some of that, your insights into the bookstore world, kind of make their way into the book?
Yes, I love bookstore owners. I love bookstores, and I'm not just saying that to you because your
We're a
bookseller.
bunch, yeah, we're a
But
bunch of eccentrics for sure.
yes, but my best friend from college owns the Golden Notebook bookstore here in Woodstock, and so just to get some of the facts, try and make it pretty realistic. I talked to him and I had him read the book, but um, being a bookstore owner is a really interesting thing. And I think this is like a great thing for this character to be because unlike other businesses you own, it plays to people's emotions. So,
Yeah.
like my friend James, for instance, has had people coming in saying, why don't you carry RFK Jr.'s book and like getting mad at him over it, or why don't you carry this book? Or why is your religion section in the front? Why is it in the back? What are you saying with this? Books are something that are close to people's hearts. And so when you're a bookstore
Yep.
owner, you kind of absorb that type of emotion. So I thought that was a good occupation for Meg to be in, where she's sort of used to kind of dealing with this over emotion in your business, but it turns out to be something a lot more than that.
I mean, reading is obviously a very intimate experience, and it's like, working in bookstores all these years, you become part-time therapist,
Yeah.
you learn in some cases way too much about, about some of the,
Yeah, I mean, books are close to our heart. I mean, you fall in love with your first book that you
yeah,
read. You really, nobody's like, I fell in love with my first pair of shoes and I can't stop thinking about them. It's not the
right.
same thing. All those
Um,
shoes are great.
Imelda Marcos would beg to
Yes,
disagree.
that's true. Imelda Marcos would like a word, but
Yeah,
yeah,
right. Exactly.
exactly.
Um,
Um, you also talk so much about um fear in the book, and how people overcome it, and that so much of it is about like basically women overcoming fear. And I think that's a great message to be sending out into the world right now. Sorry to interrupt the audience questions
oh,
or
not at all.
your questions.
No, our mutual friend Wendy Corsi Staub is tuning in, and
Oh, yay.
yeah, she's
Great
great.
author. Wonderful author.
Absolutely. And you've actually kind of addressed her question, but she was just wondering about, what was the original inspiration for the book?
Oh yeah. It's interesting, just talking to Talia about this because the inspiration were a couple of different things. It was just the idea of masses against a normal person. So the McMartin trial really influenced me, and it's something I've always wanted to write about. And then Pizzagate more recently, sort of how the internet can act as an accelerant to those feelings, to those, satanic panic type of, or whatever type of feelings, those irrational fears and conspiracy theories. So, yeah.
Did you have a model or models in mind for the book, The Prophecy?
Um, that's a good question.
Because
I
it's
mean, I wanted it,
misinterpreted by everybody, right? I mean,
yeah. Well,
what she
it's
intended when she wrote it is not what people are reading into it.
well, the interesting thing is, so my husband wrote a movie that came out in 1994 and it was called No Escape and it starred Ray Liotta and it was like an all-male futuristic prison movie and he wrote it, they bought a book, Gail Ann Hurd did, he wrote it on assignment. Strangely, he chose to talk about a war, like some kind of event, like a horrible event in Benghazi. He just chose Benghazi in 1994, and then also, strangely enough, the movie came out in it was set in 2022, and then Ray Liotta died in 2022. So he was getting emails or people like, how can you tell the future? And this is sort of like, how did you know about Benghazi? How did you know Ray Liotta was going to die in 2022 in this movie? He's like, I didn't. I just randomly wrote this thing. So that was definitely an inspiration for Meg writing the prophecy when she was 15 years old and, talking about a plague. And I mean, I say in the book, tons of books talk about plagues, but she had people wearing masks and, so therefore, people believe that she was not only foretelling the future, but had had a satanic curse involved.
Right. Now, Jen Johans has actually given me a couple of really good questions.
Oh, great.
She said you might want to ask Allison about, yeah, that you were a journalist writing for kind of gossipy mags like OK, and
Yes.
and
Yes, exactly.
her question is, did writing for those help give her the idea about how someone could get things confused or misconstrued?
Um, yes. Okay, so right, when you're writing for I wrote for In Touch Weekly, I've written for Us in the past. I've written for, all these gossip mags, and writing for them, you know, everybody's looking for a narrative to shape sort of just normal things that happen. So like when you're writing for one of those magazines and, Ben Affleck is seen, walking down the street with, I don't know, some young actress or whatever, and you're writing, and it's just, they're just going to get a cup of coffee because they're both working on the same movie. But if you impose, like, they met on the movie, there was this wonderful love story that happened, and, you could impose a narrative on anyone. And that's what those magazines are. They're using like real life people to sort of tell these kind of stories. That are maybe based in fact, but have a lot of fiction involved. It's kind of
Mm.
like the Satanic Panic in a way, writing for these, it's sort of like that. So yeah. I don't know if that makes sense, but I hope it does.
How much further do you step into the National Enquirer? I mean, that's quite a jump, of course.
Well, I read, my first job out of college, I wrote for Star Magazine, which at the time was like it was like the Inquirer. It's much classier now, but it was it was like the Inquirer. So yeah, I would, we'd sneak onto movie sets and, masquerade as an extra, or I crashed David Hasselhoff's wedding. That was something I did. I'm not I'm not proud of any of this, but these were things that I did. But yeah, so you do these things, you get this information. I don't know. I mean, you draw lines, I drew moral lines as to what I didn't want to report on. So I would find out some information that would be incredibly compromising to an actor that might ruin his career. And I've just said, no, I don't think I'm going to really report on this.
I
It's an interesting situation to be in.
I have to head out, but what a pleasure to
Yeah,
talk to you and sort of meet you after admiring your work. And thank you so much for hosting this
Yeah,
conversation.
thanks so much for joining us, Talia.
yeah. Thank you, Talia.
Before
This
you
was wonderful.
before you
And
go, do you have a minute? Somebody's asked about what asking you about what your novel is going to be about. Can you talk about that for a sec?
oh gosh, well, I mean, it's taking me ages to write, so any spoiler I give now will be irrelevant in 5 to 10 years, or whatever. But it's about a woman, a Jewish woman, like living through the First World War and Russian Civil War and the interwar years and the Nazis, and she's a serial poisoner who just keeps killing men across the continent of Europe and making her way to America. So I've been reading a lot of books about the Eastern Front and the Russian Civil War lately.
Oh,
Um, but that's the idea, is that it's this sort of like, those like sweeping magisterial like 20th century history novel where like one character embodies like the great sweep of the 20th century. I'm like, but what if it was this lady who just murdered every man who tried to possess her?
I
And she
love this. I love this. I want to read this. This is fantastic.
yeah. So, well, I'll probably write you some desperate email at 3 a.m. being like, how do I fiction? Um, now now that we've broken the ice. Um,
I can't wait.
thank you so much.
Thank you, Natalia. This was
Take
wonderful.
care. All
Yeah, you
right.
too.
Take care.
Bye.
Thank you. Yeah. All right. Well, Allison, yeah, the what else do you have going on? You have the next Sunny Randall book coming. And
Yes, that's
somewhere you mentioned that those were like palate cleansers. Uh,
yes.
Going back and forth between this sort of intense emotional experience of this kind of novel and then going back to the comforting place, I guess, of a Sunny Randall world. Is that a nice rhythm to go back and forth?
It really is. I love Sunny, and I'm writing that novel now, and it really is, a wonderful world to go back to. I love all the characters. There's a safety in it. It's, the books are, people die in those books, but it's not like the characters that are there they're like a family kind of thing to kind of sort of come back to. I love them. I love writing them.
And what's next for you? What's your next book going to be about?
Well, the next Sunny Randall book that I'm writing is about there's a character, Melanie Joan Hart, who is a frequent Parker character that appears also in Mike Lupica's books. And she comes to Sunny because she wants to find out the identity of this reviewer on a sort of a Goodreads type website, but it's totally anonymous, who trashed her first memoir, just trashed
Okay.
it. And she made the mistake of commenting on it in not a very
Oh,
nice way. And even though she deleted it, it goes viral. So she wants to find this anonymous reviewer and kind of save her career because it's basically she's getting canceled over this. So that's what it's about.
boy, a lot of us can relate to that,
Yeah, that's exactly, exactly. I've
Yeah.
come right up to the ledge of writing that
Yeah.
comment, but I haven't.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. And do you have plans for your next kind of, is it going to be a standalone or?
I do have a standalone idea in the works, but it's in such the early phases that I'm a little shy of talking about it,
Sure.
but I'm
Yeah.
hoping it happens. So,
Well, thanks. This has been a great hour. Really
yeah, I
appreciate you
really
coming as
enjoyed it.
always. And hopefully we'll get you coming back in person to the desert here
I'd love
next
to.
September. Yeah,
Yes.
be great to see you again, Allison.
Oh,
And
it would be great to see you too. This has been
yeah,
wonderful. Thank you so, so much. I love your store and it's amazing.
well, thanks so much and have a great night and we
You
will
too.
talk to you soon.
Okay,
All right. Thanks,
terrific.
everybody.
Thank